Hi. I want to talk to you a little bit today about mindfulness and meditation strategy. There are a ton of guided meditations online and they can be super helpful, but I find that it can also be helpful to have some insight about what the structure is that kind of underlies what's going on in a guided meditation. And this way, when you know the structure of it, you can do it on your own a little bit more as well. So, a lot of us are dealing with difficult emotions every day because life is stressful. And then, some of us, the anxiety goes to levels that get kind of out of hand. So it's really important that we all learn how to just kind of manage our emotions and view what's happening internally from different perspectives that make it all easier to handle. So I wrote an ebook about this called 9 Steps to Transform Anxiety Mindfully. And I'm just going to kind of quickly run through some of these steps. So before I do that, though, I want to just talk about the 3 components that I think are the most important for mindfulness practice. And so the first is to be non-judgmental. And we'll go into this more in a little bit. The second is to be curious. And that's kind of like that childlike curiosity where you're more in your body than you are in your brain. That we all used to sort of be like this as we were developing for the most part. And then the third is compassion for ourselves and for others. So you're going to see those 3 elements throughout these 9 steps that I'm about to give. So the first, and this is again sort of how to sort of apply mindfulness to emotions that are challenging. So the first step is to just pause and pay attention. Because, usually we don't pause a lot of times. There's just sort of some kind of feeling, and then there's an immediate response or a reaction. And a lot of times we react in the same ways over and over again, and it just ends up not being helpful at a certain point. So to pause and pay attention might just mean stopping, acknowledging what you're thinking in that moment, acknowledging what you're feeling in that moment. Acknowledge your surroundings, even just being willing to sort of take a step, take a beat. And then the second step is to acknowledge and own any judgments that are showing up about your experience. So back to that first thing that I said earlier about non-judgment. Non-judgment doesn't mean that you don't have judgments. That would be kind of asking a little bit too much to ask any of us to just not have judgments. And there's biological benefit to us having judgments, so we wouldn't even want to eradicate that altogether. But it is important to just acknowledge that there's a judgment, kind of own that it's there, and then go from there. So the third step here is to suspend the judgments that are there and be willing to explore the experience in a fresh and accepting way. And so part of suspending your judgment is also suspending the label. So say for instance that you've paused and you've paid attention and you recognize that you're feeling anxious or pain or something like that. And when you think about sort of all that comes along with a label like that, pain is it's pretty much already decided that it's kind of a negative and that for the most part we want to fix it and don't want to experience it. So a lot comes with it. So if we can be willing to suspend our labels and our judgments, it might mean that we even set the word anxiety aside. We set the word pain, the word discomfort. We just set all of them aside, not to make them false or wrong, but just to kind of acknowledge, okay, I think this is pain. I think this is discomfort. I'm just going to set that whole thing that I think I know over here so that I can kind of be ready for what comes next. So And so that next part is being willing to explore what's actually going on when I'm not kind of viewing it through this really specific lens that I've always viewed it through. So step number 4 is to stop the mental storyline. And this is something that probably will have to be done again and again. And actually, part of meditation in general is to sort of recognize when, when the mind has started doing what it does, and then recognizing that and returning your attention into the present moment over and over again. So it's not like we stop the mental storyline once and it's gone for good. It's just something that we kind of have to keep recognizing and coming back to. So step 5 is dropping into the awareness of the body. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier about having that childlike curiosity. So, if you maybe imagine yourself as a little kid playing in the sandbox or playing in your backyard or something like that, you probably had a real sense of like what the sand or the dirt felt like in between your fingers. You probably had a really clear sense of the smells that were going on. It's just more of an invitation to experience life through your senses in your body. And so when we do that, there's just sort of an experience of, like, for instance, right now, I can feel myself sitting in the seat. I can feel my feet on the ground. I can feel the temperature of the air. I can see the lights kind of coming at me from different directions. And I don't necessarily need to go into my mind then and analyze it all or label it all or figure it out. There's just this presence in the body. And so a lot of times when we're going into difficult emotions, all of the attention goes up into the mind and into the stories of what's going to come or what's already happened. And so we can get kind of cut off from our own bodies. So it's important again and again to just continue to return to the awareness in the body. And a lot of times, if there's a difficult emotion or even a pleasant emotion, there's also kind of a felt sense in the body that goes along with that. That's kind of how we can tell what's going on in the world. I have a funny feeling or whatever it is. So being willing to feel into the body without that judgment, because we already set that judgment aside. So for instance, with what we had said earlier was maybe pain or anxiety, if I lay those words down and I come into my body with that curious awareness, then I'm sort of creating space to experience something in a fresh way or in a new way. So the 6th step is to just kind of roll the feeling around like a treasure, being willing to explore different facets of the thing or of the feeling, different perspectives, and also finding out what are the actual sensations that are involved in this thing. Because again, like if I think I'm feeling anxious, then probably I'm going up into my head and I'm telling myself the story of it. Maybe I have a knot in my stomach that I just want to fix and get rid of, and that just becomes sort of evidence that things are bad right now. But from this approach, I'm acknowledging anxiety. I'm setting aside what I think I know. I'm dropping back into my body. And then so like maybe rolling that feeling around means that I go bring my attention directly into maybe the tension in my belly or my chest or my throat. And I allow myself to experience it. Maybe for the first time ever, because maybe before this I've just felt it for just a second and gone and distracted myself with something. So this is an invitation to really experience it. And then, maybe other words start to come up that feel actually a little bit more accurate and maybe less stigmatized, maybe less heavy and not implying so much additional stuff. So like maybe I just notice that there's heat, or maybe I feel kind of a boundary to the sensation. And maybe I dive even further deeply into it and allow myself to kind of be surrounded by it and really curious about it and see what happens if I give it more space to exist rather than trying to just cram it away. And so a lot of times people discover that, the sensation sort of dissipates. Maybe it moves. Maybe it wasn't what they thought it was to begin with. So step 7 is as you continue to practice presence, you're also practicing self-compassion, which I mentioned earlier. So, that can look a lot of ways. And so part of how I like to talk about this with people is finding out like what form of compassion really resonates for you. And so, I know there's kind of a theory of the 4 love languages. So, maybe that's one way that you kind of think about how to show yourself compassion, finding out what really suits you. But with this exercise, you might show compassion to yourself, one, by recognizing when you start to think, maybe you recognize that there are some self-critical thoughts. Something like, I shouldn't be feeling this. What's wrong with me? This shouldn't be happening. I thought I was over this by now. Whatever it is, when you recognize that that's kind of what your brain is doing, then you might start to introduce some more compassionate thoughts into your mind. So, something, maybe a more compassionate version of that is just, it's okay that I'm feeling this because here it is. It's already here. And I'm willing to learn from it. And, it doesn't make me a failure as a person or something like that. Another way to sort of explore compassion with yourself is through that awareness in the body. Recognizing if you're just being kind to yourself in your body, or if you're being kind of harsh with yourself and making adjustments as needed. And step 8 is, this isn't a core element of mindfulness by any means, but I think it's an interesting thing to explore. So you might ask questions of the feeling that you're experiencing in your body, and then be willing to learn from the experience of the feeling rather than just going into your mind and sort of analyzing the feeling and trying to figure out why it's there and how to get rid of it. You might drop into the feeling in your body and ask the feeling as if it were another person even. Just ask the feeling what it wants you to learn or understand or change. And it's not to say that, that you just automatically do or believe whatever comes to mind after you ask that question, but it might give you a different perspective. Because again, when we're really just trying to get rid of a feeling, we're not likely to be curious about it. So through this process, you're allowing yourself to actually become curious and learn from what these sensations and thoughts are maybe trying to bring to your attention. And then step 9 here is respond only if you discover that a response is appropriate. And this is in here because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times it's the uncomfortable feelings that we have that lead to a lot of our reactive behaviors that can ultimately cause problems in our lives. And they might be things that we do and then we feel like we wish we could undo, but it's sort of already too late. So this whole process of starting with pausing and paying attention and exploring the feeling internally first gives you that moment to sort of consider if certainly it's not about reacting anymore, then it would be about responding. And there might be certain times where, based on what you've discovered internally, where there may not be anything to do. at that point. Because maybe it's resolved itself, or maybe you find that the feeling has suggested that you do something that maybe you hadn't even considered before, and so then you can go about doing that as kind of consciously and intentionally as possible. So I do hope that those steps were helpful for you. And if you check down below in the comments, I've put a link to that blog that I wrote, that ebook, so you can go ahead and read in even more detail about that and start to put this into practice for yourself. And I'd love it if you'd drop me some comments and let me know if you find this useful and how it can be helpful for you. So I'm Andrea Shipley, and I'm really glad that you watched, and maybe I'll hear from you soon. Bye.